Oh iya.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Asia Regional Discussions on Trends and Challenges of Electoral Justice, Days 2. First, I would like to greet the Honorable Chairman and Member of Bawaslu Republik Indonesia, and also all of delegation of this conference. To start our conference today, let me invite our first moderator. Please welcome Mr. Ferry Amsari.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning all participants. Thank you for attending this event. My name is Ferry Amsari. The next few hours. In this session, we will discuss the issue of electoral dispute resolution structure and procedure. Many legal theories have their own point of view about investigation and evidence to solve electoral dispute. Of course, not all of them effectively solve the dispute problems. Some countries have their own opinion about how to solve the problem. Another country probably have the other opinion about how to solve the electoral dispute. In the case of Indonesia, the dispute applicant must prove the application to the various institutions, ranging from Bawaslu, the administrative court, to the constitutional court. So I think we have a lot of doors to solve the problems. So you can imagine how the applicants want to prove the problem in that many doors. So it getting sometimes confusing for them to solve the problem. And the problem, in my point of view, is each of these institutions probably has a different perspective in understanding and conducting investigation and evidence. We will discuss about this with three speakers. The first one is Dr. Ratna Dewi Petalolo, Commissioner of Bawaslu. And the second speaker, Chad Fikri. He is a Vice President of Global Strategy and Technical Leadership from International Foundation for Electoral System, and also Advisory Council member of the Global Network on Electoral Justice, who will join with us on Zoom. And also the third speaker, Mercedes Delgado Lopez. She is the coordinator of the Technical Cabinet of the Supreme Court of Spain, and also Vice Presidency of Europe of the Global Network on Electoral Justice. Each speaker will speak for maximum of 10 minutes, and we will begin with the first one, Dr. Ratna Dewi. Please, the time is yours.
Terima kasih, moderator. Thank you, moderator, Mr. Ferry Amsari, which has kindly introduced me
kewenangan penegakan hukum pemilu dalam penyelenggaraan pemilu
introduced
di
regarding
Indonesia,
the
problematika terkait dengan keterlibatan begitu banyaknya
Indonesia and the
lembaga
problems
di dalam penegakan
with
hukum pemilu.
the many agencies and institutions that are involved. In this morning session,
Saya akan menyampaikan
I will
kewenangan
present matters regarding the authority of
oleh Bawaslu,
investigative
penanganan
authority owned by Bawaslu in
Selamat pagi.
elections.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi
Good morning.
wabarakatuh. Ibu dan Bapak yang saya hormati,
Ladies and gentlemen,
dengan investigasi dalam
the
penanganan
authority, the investigative authority
di
in
Indonesia
election offenses
diatur di dalam
in Indonesia is stipulated in
tahun
Law Number 7
17
of 2017.
itu undang-undang tentang pemilu.
This is the law regarding general elections.
Tahun 2017 diatur
In
secara tegas tentang
the
investigasi
law,
sebagai
in this law,
bagian dari
it was stipulated regarding investigations as a part of an exercise of
di Indonesia.
administration regarding
Di Indonesia itu
electoral violences
yaitu
offenses in Indonesia. There are three types of offenses in Indonesia. First is administrative offenses, the second is
kode etik
criminal offense, and the third is ethical code offense of
terkait
the
dengan
election
investigasi
commission.
dikenal
Regarding investigations,
pelanggaran
we know that
pelanggaran
the
administrasi
offense
pemilu
management
dan
in
juga
the election administration
pemilu.
and also in
Kewenangan
the
tentang,
criminal offenses. The
aktivitas
authority
menyelenggarakan investigasi dalam penanganan
to
pelanggaran
investigate
pemilu ini,
the electoral offenses
diatur untuk
is
penyelenggaraan pemilu tahun 2019.
regulated for the 2019
2017. Karena sebelumnya
elections in the 2017 law.
atau aktivitas tentang investigasi ini tidak diatur
The
sebagai
activity
bagian
regarding
dari
investigations was not
penanganan
previously
pelanggaran
stipulated in our laws
pemilu di Indonesia.
in Indonesia.
Di dalam Undang-Undang 7 tahun 2017
In Law Number 7 of 2017,
investigasi
the investigative authority
pemilu ini
in
diberikan kepada
election
yang berada
administration is given to Bawaslu in the central government level, the Bawaslu in the provincial level, and in the 34 provinces, Bawaslu in the cities and regencies,
Jadi
in the more than
struktur organisasi
cities
Bawaslu ini
and regencies Indonesia, and ad hoc
mulai
Bawaslu in the district level. So there are levels from the national level, provinces,
kelurahan
cities and regencies,
pada tingkat,
districts, sub-districts,
tetapi
and down to the
penanganan
election
pelanggaran,
stations.
maaf, untuk kewenangan investigasi ini
For the investigative authority, it is limited to
tingkat kecamatan dengan
the
masing-masing
district
yang diatur
level.
dalam pasal
with
50
authority
7 tahun
stipulated in Article 54
kemudian
of
untuk,
the
provinsi,
Law Number 7 of 2017. In the provincial level,
Undang-Undang
it is stipulated in
pasal 102,
Article 98, 102, and 105.
pemilu
For administrative offenses of the election, the authority to investigate is also given to Bawaslu. This investigation is known in this law. In addition to investigation for managing the offense case, there is also investigation to follow up the initial information that is provided by the public. Ladies and gentlemen,
Kami mencoba membuat konsep
I
atau
try to
konsep membangun
concept or
tentang apa sebenarnya yang dimaksud dengan
of what it means by investigation according law number 7 of 2017. This concept is adjusted to the condition of Bawaslu, which was not designed for a
untuk melakukan pencegahan dan pengawasan.
Have the authority to conduct monitor supervision,
pengawasan dan juga penindakan atau penanganan pelanggaran, baik itu penanganan pelanggaran administrasi, kode etik, tindak pidana pemilu, dan juga penyelesaian sengketa.
Administrative offenses, ethical code offenses, and criminal offenses, and to manage disputes. Investigations in Bawaslu is defined as activities of investigation, fact-finding, and gathering of evidence based on complaints and reports and supervision activities and initial
menindaklanjuti informasi awal yang nantinya
to follow up initial information and complaints and will become findings of the supervision activity. So the object of these investigations is the objective is a report of initial findings and allegations of offenses. In Bawaslu, there are two sources of information. First is findings for provision from
yang bisa disampaikan oleh masyarakat.
Elections in Indonesia, and also complaints and reports from
sebagai peserta pemilu untuk pemilu legislatif, calon presiden
in the election, the candidates of
pemantau pemilu dan tim kampanye yang sudah didaftarkan di KPU.
Candidates of president and other candidates and the team of the candidates. There are nobody else other than
investigasi yang dilakukan oleh Bawaslu adalah melakukan investigasi terhadap
are conducting investigations towards an initial information or findings. What we find from social media dan
Twitter atau yang disampaikan melalui website yang kami sediakan, laporan masyarakat, atau melalui aplikasi yang sudah kami sediakan untuk menyampaikan informasi terjadinya dugaan pelanggaran dalam penyelenggaraan pemilu yang kami sebut dengan Bawaslu. Informasi awal ini jika mengandung dugaan-dugaan pelanggaran tetapi belum memiliki bukti-bukti yang cukup kuat untuk dijadikan temuan pelanggaran pemilu, maka Bawaslu memiliki kewenangan untuk melakukan investigasi atas informasi awal yang disampaikan oleh masyarakat. Yang kedua adalah investigasi dalam penanganan pelanggaran pemilu. Ketika melakukan penanganan pelanggaran pemilu, misalnya pelanggaran administrasi pemilu, didapatkan bukti-bukti baru di dalam proses tersebut, atau ada peristiwa-peristiwa yang perlu ditindaklanjuti melalui proses investigasi untuk menguatkan proses penanganan pelanggaran pemilu, maka dilakukanlah investigasi dalam proses penanganan pelanggaran tersebut. Bentuk investigasi yang kami lakukan adalah pencarian keterangan saksi.
The allegation. The investigations that we do is we interview witnesses, evidences, we secure and analyze the location of the offense, and we analyze modus operandi. In short, I'd like to say that the offense administration management has to include its special regulation regarding the time limit of the management of the offices. Then the investigation that Bawaslu conduct has to follow this time limit that the law allows, which is from the initial information. The investigation takes place maximum 7 days, and from complaints, the investigations maximum are conducted during the investigations is occurring. How long does it take? It is limited to 14 days, 14 business days. It cannot be more than that. This
proses tersebut dianggap daluarsa.
handling management, there is more than 14 days, then it's considered expired.
Investigasi yang sudah dilakukan di dalam
For the investigation that has occurred,
hasil investigasi sebagai dasar di dalam melakukan
the investigation process is conducted in developing the recommendation and the decision and the ruling. This recommendation is the output of the administration of the regency or provincial head election. From this general election, it is called the ruling, and the result of the investigation is an important part of the decision process of the election dispute. Ladies and gentlemen, in the investigation,
prinsip-prinsip investigasi, yaitu prinsip
the principles of investigations must be followed,
prinsip transparansi dan juga
which is justice,
akuntabilitas. Nah, inilah yang menjadi dasar
consistency, and accountability, certainty and accountability.
sebagai bagian
This investigation process is the principles in conducting the investigation. The purpose of the investigation that Bawaslu is holding is to ensure the legality of the finding and report alleging offenses of elections. And this is to optimize the use of time, limit in managing violations in elections. Because if evidence is not sufficient and can affect the management of the violation, it can
karena waktu ini akan sangat mempengaruhi kualitas pembuktian di dalam proses penanganan pelanggaran pemilu.
Of the evidences of the election violation investigations.
Kami lakukan pada waktu pemilu 2019.
Our instance in 2019,
Bawaslu melakukan pengawasan terhadap
Bawaslu
yang dilakukan oleh partai politik
conduct
cetak. Kemudian berdasarkan hasil pengawasan, Bawaslu menetapkan sebagai pengambilan keterangan
mass media, and Bawaslu stated a number of parties which we think can provide information that is clear regarding allegations that we find in the social media. First is Jawa Post, a newspaper, and then the head and the secretary of Partai Solidaritas Indonesia
pengaturan di dalam peraturan KPU untuk kampanye. Kemudian Bawaslu
the
seperti bukti pembayaran
campaign regulations of the elections. Then Bawaslu gathers payment receipts made by Partai Solidaritas Indonesia to this newspaper, and Bawaslu coordinates with the police and Attorney General's office that are involved in this regulation. According to Law Number 7 of 2017, this investigation is conducted together between Bawaslu, the Attorney General's office, and the police. Hence, this case discussion involves these three institutions.
pidana pemilu terkait dengan investigasi yang kami lakukan pada tahun 2019 ini adalah
regarding this investigation in 2019,
tidak serta-merta
the result of this investigation
sebagai bahagian
cannot
dari proses
simply
penyelidikan yang
be
dilakukan
used
oleh
as a part
kepolisian.
of investigations by the police.
Pengalaman kami di tahun 2019
Because in our experience in 2019
jadwal yang sudah kami lakukan
regarding
secara
illegal
berkala,
campaigns
ternyata
outside
hasilnya
the
itu
time
kemudian
that
berbeda dengan
is
proses
allowed,
penyelidikan
the
yang
result
dilakukan
is
oleh
different
kepolisian.
from
Dan
the
hasil
investigations
akhir dari
conducted
proses
by the
penanganan
police.
pelanggaran terkait
And the
pelanggaran
final
kampanye
result
di luar
of
jadwal
this
ini
offense
dihentikan
allegation
oleh
management
kepolisian.
is
Nah, inilah
stopped
yang
by the
menjadi
police.
problem dari
This is the
kewenangan
problem that we face
investigasi
regarding the investigation authority for the election violations conducted by the Bawaslu, because it has to be done together with the police and Attorney General's office. Ladies and gentlemen, that is one example of what we did. Based on that experience, we want to share an information with you that Bawaslu, as a supervisory body that is also mandated to investigate violations and is also given authorization to investigate, we have 4 problems in conducting this authority. First is regulatory problem. It is not clear in our regulation regarding this investigative authority, especially in criminal activities related to elections. This has the potential to give uncertainties regarding the administration of election violations, because the result of Bawaslu can be different from what the police is thinking or the opinion of police. And the second one is on the legal structure caused by System Handling Act on criminal participation in election. There are the police and Attorney General's office, and there are the state court and high court, and the low allowed investigation time, and the Indonesian culture which hesitates to report allegations of offenses related to election. These are what I can explain to you regarding the investigative authority of Bawaslu as a part of the supervision authority of Bawaslu. Thank you. Greetings. Good morning.
Before I go back to the Mr. Ferry as the moderator, because in the beginning of when Mrs. Ratna Dewi Petalolo tried to explain, we're not very good with the interpreter. What the Mrs. Ratna Dewi Petalolo tried to inform us that the authority of the Bawaslu to do the investigation is provided by the constitutions and also the election law number 7 2017, and we start our investigation because based on 2 things. First, because from our report, and the second is based on of our finding. And the role and the one that the institutions that able to do the investigations is from national level, also from the provincial level, and also to the city and municipality level, and also to the district level. And Ms. Ratna Dewi Petalolo also informed us that we have the cases in 2019 with regard to the outside campaign, in newspaper, and is basically from Mrs. Afifuddin, as the commissioner that he is in the plane ready to read the newspaper, and in the newspaper that we find out that there is a campaign about the incoming elections, but it's not in the period for a newspaper campaign. So that's why we start our investigations, and we'll also, after we submit our investigations, we invite the parties, the witnesses, and after that we submit that to the police. This is one part of our or example from our experience during investigations. This is what Ms. Rana Dewi Petalolo tried to inform, and I hope now the translation is already getting better. Yes, Alberto.
Gracias, Fritz. Derivado de los problemas técnicos de la lluvia, la conectividad ha interrumpido la traducción simultánea. El comisionado Siregar ha hecho un resumen de la intervención en inglés y me han solicitado lo mismo en español. Y muy brevemente, la comisionada Ratna Dewi Petalolo nos explicó algunas de las facultades de investigación que tiene Bawaslu como el órgano supervisor de elecciones. Nos compartió que la base legal que autoriza a Bawaslu a hacer este tipo de investigaciones está en la Constitución en una reforma de 2017 y nos explicó el procedimiento a través del cual se llevan a cabo estas investigaciones en materia de delitos, en materia electoral. Primero, se integra un reporte, se integran también las investigaciones que se hacen al respecto y esta investigación se puede llevar a cabo bajo la responsabilidad de instituciones al nivel nacional, provincial, municipal y distrital. Nos compartió algún caso en 2019 sobre una campaña en periódicos que se desarrolló fuera de los tiempos establecidos. Se llevaron a cabo estas investigaciones, se invitaron a los partidos a que rindieran declaración, a los testigos y al integrar el caso se le entregó a la policía.
Well, in summary, he's explaining us the case in 2019 and it was super important to measure all the analysis because
el título del panel que hoy estamos llevando a cabo y esperamos que mejore.
They have some problems in 2019 and we hope the rain it doesn't have the problem with the translation. Thank you very much.
The interpretation that Ms. Dr. Ratna Dewi Petalolo already explained to us. I will not make any other conclusion. You already hear everything. And I hope chat also got some explanation from Dr. Fritz, who explained what Dr. Ratna present in this morning. So we will move to Chad Fikri in the US right now, online. I hope you hear me, Chad. You get the same time, around 10 minutes, please.
Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today. It's very much appreciated. I haven't been to Indonesia for a number of years, but I have enjoyed it every time that I've been there, and I hope I'm able to come back soon. I also think the presentation that we just received is very good. Many of the issues that were highlighted are ones that I have seen around the globe. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not sure if that's able to be shown or not, but I'll get started without it. It's very interesting that you're looking at investigations in particular. Oh, thank you. Next slide, please. What is a proper investigation and why are proper investigations important? As we have seen around the globe, democracy has been in decline. There's almost been a sense of despair as we've watched autocracies rise and democracies decline. Yet, recent research by VDAM has shown that democracy has many advantages that we need to lean into and understand. But recent events has shown that the community of democracies can work together to try to combat corruption, combat the rise of autocracies. And I think this is a time for the communities of democracies to come together to work on transparency and bring the visibility of corruption and other problems to the light. Furthermore, to build trust in elections and democracies, political parties, candidates, and voters all have to be able to have an avenue to resolve complaints, as was discussed in the previous presentation. As I've worked around the globe on this issue, many judges and adjudicators who are asked to resolve complaints are asked to do so in a very limited amount of time and with very little evidence, or with not the best of evidence. This is why, working with several stakeholders around the globe, we've drafted a guidebook on electoral investigations. And as you'll see, there's a copy, you can get a copy of this book on IFAS's website. What we've tried to do in this book is tie the investigation process to the principles as they're defined in General Comment 32 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In looking at investigations, we really did also notice that from a comparative perspective, there are several cross-cutting issues. First, as you can imagine, is investigations are very different in common law countries versus civil law countries or civil law systems. And so understanding those differences is very important. And as discussed in the earlier presentation, knowing that you may be adjudicating a civil action can be very different from a criminal action, and how you would adjust the way you investigate those issues and find the evidence that is needed, the burdens of proof that is required is very, very different. Also in investigations, because the stakes are so high, many times there's a perceived conflict of interest that you may see. That because the executive branch is administering an election and they're running in an election, this can seem as a conflict of interest, and it makes investigations very high stakes. So when we looked at the process of investigations, we really did break it down into parts, and you will see that if you were to look at the book. You know, of course, there's the process of the receipts of complaints and how you do that in the proper format. It's transparent, that is fair to all parties. There's also needs to be a process in which how you can triage cases, or how you can do a preliminary assessment to see if a case or a complaint rises to the level that requires an investigation. And if not, in many cases, you need to have a process to dismiss complaints that lack merit or can lead to summary judgments. If a complaint obviously makes it through this process, then you would turn to a formal fact-finding or investigation process. And we have looked at, like I said, General Comment 32 of the ICCPR, and we have looked at these four principles, and I'll talk about them very quickly. To have prompt investigations, to have thorough investigations, to have effective investigations, and this all needs to be conducted by an independent and impartial investigators. Next slide, please. Now, when you look at General Comment 31 of the ICCPR, it states administrative mechanisms are particularly required to give effect to the general obligation to investigate allegations of violations promptly, thoroughly, and effectively through independent and impartial bodies, the very standards that we use to structure our book. All of those words are very nice, of course, but how do you define them? How do you put them in practice? For those of you that have to actually hear these cases and decide them, what does that mean? Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So when we look at promptly, as I discussed, you have to have an effective place and way in which you can bring in cases, determine if there's a civil case, if it's a criminal case. know what type of evidence you may need, be able to prioritize those legitimate claims to move on. And then because election complaints have to move so quickly, how can you have a proper investigation that strikes a balance between a timely resolution of a complaint with a thorough process? How do you go through this investigation process and give it justice while also doing it within the time frame that is set? And that is how we have looked in this book. And there's a lot of detail in the book of how you would go about this in practice to do these investigations promptly, but still meet international standards. Next slide, please. And then thoroughly, as you can imagine, those who file complaints would like their cases to be handled thoroughly. And this is also how you're going to build trust in the process. So we go through the way you would look to and find substantiated facts and evidence, and how you would avoid hearsay and assumptions, to go through a process that you would conduct well-documented interviews, and the ways in which an interview with witnesses would be done properly. Of course, in a civil law system, this may be different. There may not be witnesses. It may all be done through written records, but we talk about those differences. We also talk about how to do proper analysis of evidence and present those findings. An investigator, in our point of view, should present the evidence to the adjudicator with a recommendation. How would you go about that? What would you do that? And then finally, to make sure that the work is thorough, there needs to be accurate record keeping. And there also has to be a chain of evidence that is documented and that the evidence is retained for future use. Next slide, please. And effectively, now this is where we look at the actual investigators themselves. The investigators clearly have to be competent. And in many cases, the election complaints body may actually have its own investigators, or you may turn things over to the police. So how would the police be judged to be competent? And we look at the knowledge that's required, the skills, the qualifications, the preparation that one would need to properly conduct an investigation. And then also how the investigative body has the policies and procedures in place to do that properly. We also look at ways in which you can hold the system accountable with internal and external checks. How do you make sure that the investigators are doing their jobs properly? And what are the disciplinary actions that could be taken? What's in the code of conduct and regulations and laws? And also, how do you protect those investigators? How do you give them functional or non-retaliatory immunity? How do you protect them from political pressure? How do you make sure, as was discussed in the previous presentation, who has jurisdiction to do specific types of investigation? In many countries, there are many bodies that will think they have jurisdiction, but it has to be clear. How do you maintain proper chains of evidence? We go through a lot of examples of how countries work on the chain of evidence in their countries. And then lastly, what can you do if there are malicious or negligent complaints that are filed? How can you stop frivolous lawsuits being filed without chilling participation in the process? We go through and talk about these questions and how some countries have dealt with those throughout the book. Next slide, please. And then finally, the independent and impartial bodies, which would be many of the people in this audience. We looked at fairness, objectivity, and how you would go about disclosing conflicts of interest and steps to resolve conflicts of interest, and also how you might want to define integrity and incorruptibility. These are all things that we looked in the book to try to give comparative examples of how you might look to function within this framework. And so with that, I want to say that I realize that you have to make sure that there's no one size that fits all. Every country is going to have its own legal framework, going to have its own structure, but we do believe there are some general standards that could apply for everybody that will bring trust into the process. We hope this book will provide guidance and some examples that everyone can look at, and we're always available to answer questions. But with that, I'll hand the mic over to the next speaker, and I look forward to any questions you may have. And good luck on the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chad. Chair explained how important to build transparency to solve the problem, and how also important the burden of proof on investigation, even though there is no a perfect source for any countries to do some investigation, but we do have some general standard for every country to make trust on election. I think if Alberto want to interpret, or the interpretation already getting better, what do you think? You still need?
I think it's working better
okay,
now.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, next speaker, Mercedes, will be explained also in similar amount of time, 10 minutes. I don't see Mercedes. Okay, go ahead.
Buenos días pues a todos. Reitero el pues agradecimiento por la invitación.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event.
Voy a exponer técnicas de investigación.
I'm going to talk about techniques of investigation, how we do it, and just like general standards to follow. Specifically in Spain, also how we do it locally, and also how we do it internationally.
Con carácter general, cabe señalar que la investigación constituye la actividad más importante de toda
The Constitution is the most important part in the campaigns.
Quiénes son los electores, los elegibles y el entorno en el que se va a desarrollar esta campaña electoral y poder formar así una adecuada estrategia electoral.
How we will do an adequate strategy to do this investigation, to do this election. This helps us a lot to know the trends. How are we going to do the elections without hesitate? It's important to combine this investigation with another analysis, with different processes. We need to collect evidence for this investigation. More often in the questionnaires, we are using technology. We need, however, this technology is also not accurate, especially for the population. The culture is not embracing this technology at all.
Sino también como forma de manipular o engañar.
The idea is that this can be fake also, and the people think that they can manipulate the results. That's why also social media is a big part here. Particularly in Spain,
el organismo dependiente del gobierno y adscrito al Ministerio de la Presidencia.
In the government brought to the president officially.
Ello mediante encuestas periódicas para hacer estimaciones.
They do questionnaires every day.
Una consulta electoral. Así se llevan a cabo estudios pre y postelectorales con el fin.
They do questionnaires about how to do this process before to do this investigation. And they participate. There are like a lot of people participating in these investigations before to do the elections. Usually they use this process in person, or also they do it technology to spread these questionnaires.
Ha sido puesta en tela de juicio con bastantes críticas por los desaciertos con los resultados electorales.
This is not really good for everyone, and not everyone thinks this is a good idea to do. And as we do this pre-test,
en las comunidades autónomas de Madrid y de Castilla y León. Ello incluso ha motivado que el Centro de Investigaciones Sociológicas haya tenido que establecer un nuevo modelo de estimación con sistemas.
They try to motivate these new models and new methods to try to involve more people in it, especially the government.
Central, que es el órgano superior de la administración electoral en España, donde en virtud de un acuerdo dictado este mismo año, tras desestimar la denuncia de un partido político contra el Centro de Investigaciones Sociológicas,
After we find complaints in one of the governments,
en lo que resta del periodo electoral,
we thought it's important to do more questionnaires, and one of the members
concurrente en relación con las denominadas encuestas flash objeto de la denuncia, señala expresamente que el Centro de Investigaciones Sociológicas debe su prestigio al trabajo de profesionales con grandes muestras y a análisis transparente. Afecta a este principio que modifique su modo de actuar mediante la innovación relativamente reciente de publicar encuestas de menor muestra el último día de autorización de la publicación de las mismas. Esta práctica
it's very important to use this method and all the analysis before to launch the last information.
Proceso electoral. Por eso indico que es el propio órgano electoral el que a través de alguno de sus miembros pone ya el acento en una forma de controlar la realización de estas encuestas electorales.
That's why it's very important to use these questionnaires. I also would like to highlight
estas últimas elecciones celebradas en España, como es el que se pone de manifiesto en el acuerdo de la Junta Electoral Central relativa a
in the principal
una noticia en un medio
government
por ser susceptible de ser considerada un sondeo electoral. Se trata de publicaciones en medios digitales consistente en la reproducción de lo que se llama emoji panel.
They use a lot of social media. It can be a different method.
La valoración de distintos productos gastronómicos que por su color o por otras características permitían ser asociados con determinadas candidaturas electorales que se presentaban a las elecciones. Es así, estos paneles de manera sencilla podría asociar su resultado con la intención de voto de cada formación política. Por ello, la Junta Electoral señala que cabe apreciar que con estas prácticas se ha intentado eludir la prohibición de realizar encuestas electorales en los 5 días anteriores a la votación, que permite...
That's why they have been implementing this method and this technology 5 days before to do the electoral decisions.
Al responsable de la entidad autora de estas encuestas electorales. Es la propia Junta Electoral Central la
They need to do these surveys
de manifiesto
and is in charge of
este tipo de conductas está sancionada en primer lugar como delito electoral, para lo cual se establece una pena de prisión, de multa y de inhabilitación para profesión u oficio, y también otra sanción por infracción de la normativa en materia de encuestas electorales con una sanción de multa de hasta 30.000 euros, con lo cual se puede ver la gravedad de infringir esta normativa establecida en materia de encuestas electorales en la normativa española. Para concluir, también quisiera hacer referencia a algunos ejemplos de solicitud de intervención del Tribunal de Justicia de la Unión en la materia que nos estamos refiriendo. Así, en concreto, me voy a referir al asunto C306 del año 2021, que está relacionado con la celebración de elecciones al Parlamento en Bulgaria.
To conclude, I would like to give an example in 2021.
Son miembros de la Unión y cuando el tratamiento de datos no se limita a la recogida de datos en el contexto de la referida actividad electoral. Así, lo que se plantea al tribunal es si es contraria la regulación establecida por aceptar a ese tratamiento de datos. También se cuestiona si es contraria esa normativa cuando de antemano se excluye y se restringe la posibilidad de que durante la comprobación de los resultados de
There are a lot of restrictions between the analysis that they do from the souvenirs. That's why a lot of people question about the fidelity of this information. How accurate is this information?
Esto permite una determinada injerencia sujeta al principio de proporcionalidad en el derecho a la protección de los datos personales de las personas presentes en los.
They try to keep safe the information, the personal information, and the information that they try that is important. But still, people is not trust. People doesn't trust on the security of this information.
De las limitaciones existentes a la hora de conformar esa estrategia electoral de los partidos políticos y las restricciones que se derivan de los resultados obtenidos mediante la utilización de esas técnicas de investigación electoral.
Thank you, Mercedes Delgado Lopez. Because your language is too beautiful for me, and the connection between our earphone with the interpretation little bit hanging in there. So it's not your mistake, it is mine. So Alberto, could you please explain a brief what Mercedes explained to us?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, and I apologize if I miss anything. I will try to summarize best as possible. Mercedes Delgado was explaining how surveys and investigations related to electoral processes are carried out in general terms internationally, but specifically. She referred to general investigation techniques, such as surveys that help to learn the trends, the electoral trends before the election, and how they gather information from polls, online polls, official statistics, and other mechanisms to gather information about how the electoral process is going to be carried out. These investigation techniques include the use of artificial intelligence with mechanisms such as social listening and other technologies that also have implications for the privacy of users and those being consulted during these investigations. And that, of course, they have a malicious side because they can be used to manipulate public opinion prior to elections. Then she referred to the Spanish case and to an institute that's in charge of carrying out these electoral surveys. It's the Center for Sociological Investigations that's linked to, it's part of the government, it's also linked to the Ministry of the Presidency. And they carry out the official investigations prior and after the elections about electoral behavior, and the participation of people that are surveyed is voluntary and they can be carried out in the distance or in person. This work has recently been questioned because it overestimated certain trends, particularly related to left-wing parties. These prompted some complaints to the Electoral Authority in Spain, which is the central electoral management body, and they still solve that the center carries out their investigations in a transparent way. They publish the surveys in a timely manner, and they try to avoid interference of any nature. During the latest election, she also mentioned the case of a media outlet, a digital media outlet, where they used references to, if I understood correctly, to food, that they could be associated to certain political trends to avoid making an explicit reference to the political party and trying to go around the legislation and publish certain trends, political trends, without violating the law. However, she also mentioned that any behavior that is outside of the law regarding electoral surveys can be sanctioned as an electoral felony with fines up to 30,000 euros. This explains how serious these are taken. And lastly, she also made a reference to European jurisprudence about elections for parliament in Bulgaria with decision C-306 from 2021, where she basically showed the importance of privacy in the management of personal data. This is another implication when this kind of investigation is carried out related to elections. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Alberto. I think we already run out of time, so I will give you a chance to giving some question or probably to share your own perspective regarding three speakers who already explained about the experience in three countries. So we do have like 20 to 25 minutes to discuss. First will be I give to Mbak Titi to give some question or probably another perspective, please.
Thank you, Pak Ferry. I have questions for Pak Chet Fikri. Pak Chet, I'm very happy to see you again and to listen your views even via Zoom. First question, you have previously explained about the importance of an independent and impartial electoral justice body regarding the function of examining and proving cases. My question is, does the process or model of selecting members of judges of the electoral justice body have an impact on the independence and impartiality of the electoral justice body? If so, is there a mechanism for the selection process of judges or members that you recommend? And the second one, I have two questions. Do you have an idea about a mechanism so that parties and also the public can feel safe when participating in investigation and evidence process at the election justice agency or bodies, so that they are not worried that they will be intimidated or suppressed due to the process they follow? Thank you, Pak Chet.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for the question. On the nomination of election management bodies or judges, there is not a one way that works that's going to apply to every country. We do have publications that talk about different methods, all the way from political election management bodies to independent election management bodies. Of course, anything that will be transparent and go through a confirmation process through the legislature that brings confidence into the process is what usually works best. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have a clear answer for you because it is going to be dependent on the country and the trust that the public has in the process. In regards to the way in which witnesses and others can feel safe, we do talk about that in the book that we've published and the way some countries go about this issue. For investigators, it's making sure that they have immunity and there are ways in which people are protected against improper influence. And of course, witnesses have to have their identity protected when it's necessary, and the evidence needs to be clear, and it has to be a process of maintaining that evidence so that there is transparency in the process, if people are not used in a way that is threatening or surprising. So we do go through some very specific examples in the book. And if after you get a chance to look at that, if you have further questions, I'd be happy to follow up.
Okay. Another question from Mr. Diaman.
Thank you very much, moderator, and good to see you, Chad. From Ibu Dewi's presentation, it's where Indonesia's model of separating the electoral management body from the electoral justice body, and this is true in some of the countries represented here as well, Mexico, Spain, France. But we do know that there are electoral management bodies that are also simultaneously electoral justice bodies. So I'm wondering what the views of the speakers and others in the room views this potential conflict of interest, where the election management body is responsible for conducting the elections, thereby providing a service to voters and also to political parties, candidates, but also at the same time hear and resolve disputes, which sometimes can also involve them as one of the object of the complaint. So, yeah, what are your views on the potential of conflict of interest there? And also, Chad mentioned about the difference between common law and civil law systems impacting how things work in different countries, and that reminded me of Justice Mba's response to my question yesterday about the need to train judges. And there was actually a difference in his answer with Justice Menendez's answer, where Justice Mba thinks that it is necessary because the jurisprudence is still new, and therefore judges need to be trained and learn about the jurisprudence. Whereas Justice Menendez thinks that such a training is not necessary because and this is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is because what's important is the competence of the judges. And therefore indirectly saying that jurisprudence is not crucial. And this is, as we all know, is the main difference between common law and civil law systems. Where in common law systems, you have to follow jurisprudence. So that's more of an observation than a question. But please, please feel free to comment on that. And then on the appointment of judges that Titi just asked about, I had a chat with Alberto during dinner where he explained to me how the Tribunal Electoral judges are being appointed over there. And we can discuss this in more detail, but I would like to say that Mexico and Indonesia have similarities, and I agree completely with Chad's answer that it's different. You can't really put a rule of thumb on how they should be appointed. So it's very contextual. So I'm saying that the context of Mexico and Indonesia are very similar, where before the end of the 90s, both countries have very strong one-party systems. And as consequence of that one-party system, there is a history of partiality of civil service. So in that case, it's good to learn from, well, for Indonesia to learn from Mexico in terms of how to appoint judges, because they're also putting a great emphasis on the need to find independent and impartial individuals to sit on the bench. Thank you.
The committee just told me that we already run out of time, but I asked them to for giving like additional time, 10 minutes, because I think we do have several problems. So for the speaker, Mercedes or Dr. Ratna, if you want to respond that Mr. Adi perspective, I will start from Dr. Ratna if you have any comments for Mr. Adi's perspective.
Terima kasih. Kami memang menyadari betul bahwa pelaksanaan investigasi dalam penanganan
investigation in handling general election offenses by Bawaslu have many shortcomings that needs to be fixed. It can be through regulatory improvement and improvement in increasing public participation in supporting the investigation process done by Bawaslu. Bawaslu is tasked for the supervision and to handle offense and violations management and to enforce the law. Bawaslu also conducts adjudication authority as well, which this is not ideal. I push for election tribunal that is separate from Bawaslu because law enforcement in general election is important in achieving legal certainty, and we feel that the authority of Bawaslu is not sufficient in handling violations and disputes in the general elections. Bawaslu does not have any enforcement power, the power that are usually held by law enforcement agencies. Bawaslu does not have the authority to seize evidence. This limitation of authority by Bawaslu hinders or limits the Bawaslu's ability in investigating an allegation of offenses or violations. This, in addition to the time limitation, makes it extremely hard for Bawaslu. Therefore, we need to learn from other countries to make the investigative process becoming an important and instrumental part in law enforcement in general election. But because Bawaslu is different from tribunals, although we have a function of tribunals within Bawaslu, and because there are limitations in the authority of Bawaslu, this creates the problems that Bawaslu has still hangs on Bawaslu, and we cannot solve this problem. It is important for Bawaslu to have clear authority in enforcing the law, and investigations become an instrumental part in giving certainty and giving justice in general elections.
Thank you, Dr. Ratna. Mercedes, if you have a comment for Mr. Adi's perspective, go ahead.
Bueno, en España yo creo que el órgano electoral dirige perfectamente la investigación, ¿no?, de los procesos electorales en cuanto que tiene por objeto garantizar precisamente la transparencia, la objetividad y el principio de igualdad durante todo el proceso que rodea a las elecciones. Por lo tanto, las decisiones en principio no se cuestiona que estén adoptadas dentro de un proceso pues riguroso y adoptado con plena independencia e imparcialidad.
It is important to don't have just one method. It's important to be more flexible in this method.
Y luego, en todo caso su supervisión corresponde a los tribunales, ¿no?
And it's also very important that we supervise all the information, that the tribunals see this information and they evaluate.
Responde al proceso totalmente preestablecido y con todas las exigencias legales.
It is very important to follow all the rules.
Una sentencia dictada por el Tribunal Supremo Español, que es de 26 de mayo del 2021,
to see this investigation.
Pone una sanción a un presidente del gobierno en funciones. Se trata de una sanción de multa que se le impuso por la Junta Electoral.
There is a fine that they apply
Quebrantamiento del principio de neutralidad durante el proceso.
if they don't follow these rules for the investigation.
La Junta la que impone pues la sanción y posteriormente es desestimado el recurso que interpuso el presidente del gobierno por el Tribunal Supremo. En ese caso,
the government put like a fine if they don't follow all the rules and all the investigation in the way they are, if they don't follow the method.
Y que pues señala que constituye un axioma esencial de nuestro ordenamiento jurídico y que, por lo tanto, al haberse quebrantado ese principio de neutralidad durante el proceso electoral con la consiguiente merma del...
That's why if they break these rules and they don't follow the instructions, they will be fined.
A esa denegación del recurso presentado por el presidente del tribunal.
And the president gives these instructions.
Por eso digo que creo que existe un procedimiento pues adecuado.
I really think there is a standard way to follow instructions and to keep the order for the investigation.
En ese sentido, no creo que haya un conflicto en ese nivel de instituciones.
That's why I think there is not conflict between institutions. They just need to follow one rule, one standard rule.
I think the interpretation already getting better, so we don't need you, Alberto. Probably, if Chad have any comments to Mr. Adi's perspective or other comment from the audience, if you have one, go ahead.
Just very quickly, I think this issue of a conflict of interest when an election management body in particular is conducting an investigation is one that we hear often. There's a tension between an election management body having access to the evidence and the timeline that they're dealing with and a knowledge of an election that's going to make them more effective if they do it properly in doing the investigation. But if that's the case, there absolutely needs to be a right of appeal to the judiciary if the EMB is doing the investigations themselves, particularly if it's a case that's against the EMB itself. And I want to agree with the last speaker that if there are proper regulations, codes of conduct, and transparency, some of this can be resolved as long as those regulations, codes of conduct are enforced. And so it's very important, the enforcement part. We can have the laws on the books, but if they're not enforced in a way, then it's obviously that it won't be effective. But I do believe the most effective form is when there is an independent body that can do the investigation outside of the EMB. But I understand how in some countries it is more efficient for the EMB to do the investigation to start with. So I feel like I'm saying the same thing often, but each country and the context in which you're working is going to inform how this is developed.
Thank you, Chair. I need to ask Mr. Fritz for giving a comments to the discussion today, especially about the issue that we already brought from yesterday about how the differences between Europe and civil law and Anglo-Saxon perspective on this issue.
Yeah. Thank you, Ferry. Thank you also for this opportunity. Maybe I would add a bit with regards to what Ms. Ratna Dewi Petalolo is already said that yes, the Bawaslu have the authority for investigations, but in the reality, when we talk about the reality, because we have the time frame for everything, like 3 days for filing after the finding, 2 days for witnessing, 12 days to settle the dispute. With regard to the days for dispute resolution, like for the criminal finding, you have 7 days, and if you need more, you get this another 7 days, and after that you have to submit to the police, and the police need to investigate it 5 days, and also in district attorney in the 5 days. So when one of our problem with regard to the criminal investigation, because among 2,000 election supervisors, many and maybe only 13% of them has a bachelor degree. I mean, have low degree that understand about the rule of the evidence and the rule of the interviewing. And for the 5 years that we have to train them, become the election supervisors, and also become sort of criminal investigators, it also has a burden. Maybe Bawaslu experience is not similar like you, that you meet in the end of the process, but for us as the Bawaslu, we have to start from accepting the report, investigator the report, and continuing the report and submit it to the police for criminal investigations. We only have the final and binding decisions is only with regard to administration violation, in which the election commissions at all level, they do something not according to their regulations, or they abusive the procedures. Yes, we have the final decisions. But for the criminal investigations, particularly when we talk about the collecting evidence, we need more effort. Even though, like Mrs. Ratna Dewi already informed, that in many cases we are successful, but more and lot of the cases that we're not successful, at least we can execute well. And also, maybe I want to respond what the chat already informed about the conduct. As you know, that Indonesia have 3 organizations with regard to the elections: election commissions, or national election commissions, and the second is Bawaslu as the election supervisory board, and the third is the Honorary Council for Ethics. So most of our members get ethic decisions verdict because of not comply with the day, like when they get the report, but they not finish their report on the certain days, like 5 days, or they inform that, or the ethic commission say, why you cannot bring this problem to the police? And we say, yes, we did, but the police say no. When the police say no, it's no. How hard you argue, they say no and no. But we will get the ethic verdict, because why we not able to bring this? So one cases this already particularly so blunt, investigate in already has been investigated truly, but we're not able to go through until the court. So I think it's also one of the consideration that when we talk about the electoral justice and the investigation, so the compliance is not only in institutions, but also to other institutions with respect to the how to bring the preparatory to the court. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fitz. I think we already come to end of the session. So I know we just start our discussion, but time already comes. So I will end to this session with clap to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. For Mr. Ferry Amsari. Ladies and gentlemen, we will break for 15 minutes to get a sweet coffee. And I would like to remind you to fulfill the administration's matter like boarding pass, PCR receipt, and other matters to registration area in front of the ballroom. And have a great coffee. 15 minutes.
Recording stopped.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will continue our conference today, so please take your seat. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue our conference today, so please take your seat.
Sudah di
And we invite the delegation in front of the ballroom to enter a ballroom, and we will continue our forum today. Ladies and gentlemen, we will continue our conference today. And to start these sessions, I would like to invite our next moderator, a beautiful one. Please welcome Mrs. Eka Rahmawati.
Thank you. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to all of you. I think it's still morning. I am Eka Rahmawati. I cordially welcome you all to this panel discussion of challenge to gender equal and effective protection of electoral rights. The focus of the discussion and analysis in this session will be in twofold. First is to identify whether the current system in terms of structures, regulations, procedures to attain justice is women-friendly and seriously taking gender equality into account. And second is to identify challenges and strategies in place for protection of electoral rights of women and equal administration of justice. To do so, we are thrilled to welcome our amazing panelists. So please join me in welcoming Mr. James Khan. James is Vice President for International Affairs of Citizen Congress Watch, CCW in Taiwan. They are a nation-leading organization dedicated to monitor the legislator in exercising their mandate. Our second panelist is Mrs. Regina Wall from the United States. She currently serves as Senior Global Gender Advisor at the International Foundation for Electoral System, IFES. And finally, Mrs. Monica Arali Soto Fregoso, Justice of the High Chamber of the Electoral Tribunal of Mexico. She also served as chair of the Observatory on Gender Equality on the Global Network on Electoral Justice. So with experts and representatives of electoral agencies and audience who is interested in electoral agenda, hopefully we can deeply reflect on this topic, and we share and exchange experience with regard to a gender responsive electoral justice system. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. James as first panelist to make his presentation. You have 10 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, our beautiful monitor, Eka. And thank for Bawaslu. Thank for the chairman, Abhan. And thank Fritz. Thank the other board members. Invite CCW to join this election justice network conference. It's our pleasure to share the experience in Taiwan. Okay, I have my PowerPoint. Can you please show up? Okay, I'll just have a quick to introduce what my organizer is. Okay, the first. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Citizen Congress Watch was CCW, founded at April 18, 2007. We composed of 48 organization members. Our goal is to oversee our Congress. In Taiwan, we call legislative yuan, to eliminate inadequate legislators and improve Congress culture. To achieve the goals, each year we will have release legislators' score reports, and we have some Congress oversight forums, initiate some press conference. With these efforts, we hope to strong public opinions to urge the legislative yuan toward the goals serving public welfare, transparency, efficiency, and eliminate integrity. We use 51 indicators to evaluation our legislator. I will just show up. This is our all the indicators. It's very complicated. Today, I'm not to introduce CCW. If you have any questions, we can talk about after the meeting. This is what we accomplish. You can see this is a 7 to 10 session period attendance and interpolation rate. The first point is we established at 2008. You can see the attendance always about 90% because they just need to sign up and they can go. There will be the attendance. But oral interpolation, you can see that from about 44%. And then we go into right now, it's almost 90, more than 90 oral interpolation. Because they know there's an organization representing civil society are watching them. But you can see each year, every 4 years, you can see a dramatic drop because that is an election year. Many legislators will come to their district and not in the Congress. I'll show this is a survey by Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. They just have this survey press last year, December 29th. It shows some attitude towards democracy in Taiwan. The first question is, on what extent do you agree that democracy is the best system despite the problem it might pose? You can see that more than half disagree, and very agree is 27.8, agree 47.6. The next question is, on what extent are you satisfied with the democratic politics enjoyed by the people in Taiwan? Also, there are more than 50 satisfied, but we still have room for improvement because dissatisfied have quarter, very dissatisfied.
What is happening? Someone using that room for conference. Sorry? Someone using that room for conference. I'm asking yeah, it was really loud. Like I could hear him more than this. Yeah. So they switched back because I couldn't hear. So I think it's still Paula now. So let me text with Alberto and say what's happening. If I should just do from Spanish to English.
This panel, so I'll show you some women's participation in politics. The proportion of female legislators show an overall growing trend in the past 26 years.
Switch to the original translation, no feed right now. Yeah, because we need to decide what's happening. Suddenly Paula was speaking when I was supposed to speak. And now there's no feed. We have Paula's number.
In 2005, Taiwan.
Yeah, but you guys need to decide.
So we told Paula that she will be registered by a political party.
We told Paula that she will be speaking from Spanish to English, and then you will be Spanish. Yeah, and then whenever she was not good enough, we would switch to me, which we did. But then this guy was talking so loud. We need to put Paula back on from English to Spanish. Yeah.
There's another female representation was elected. So right now, our proportion of female legislature up to 42.48. This is a very, I think, it's outstanding performance in the Asia countries. And also next is, because we are mixed member, we have the regional and national wide. It's a political party list. You can see this is a woman's, the seat and proportion of legislator of different genders in regional and national wide. Taiwan is one of the leading countries in terms of recorded percentage of women legislature. Let's take the 117.
Paula, is Paula speaking now?
72.1 and female count for only 26.9. Another example for the 2019 United Kingdom general election, female count for 33.85, the highest percentage in the history in the UK House Commons. The percentage of female politicians in Taiwan regional is outstanding also. So we are.
I don't know if I should jump in. What does it depend on?
9.6. The beginning so far is about 35.
No, she's speaking.
Oh, and then to 13 to 55. That's because we.
Then I will only do Spanish.
So we will switch back from Paula will do the English to Spanish, you will do Spanish to English.
I do Spanish to English. Thank you.
He won the election. And also, she also became the first female leader in his ruling party, DPP. And she was re-elected in 2020, make her the first female president to successfully win re-election in Asia. Okay, I'm talking about the challenge of our election. It's, I give
I think I need to lock the room again. Are you with the keys here? Okay. I mean, it's okay if other people come in. I don't mind, as long as it's not really loud with echo. But if you want to come in, sure. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Be a president, you have to prepare 50 million Taiwan dollars and 520,000 for USD. It's quite a lot of money. If you have no party to support you, it's not easy to become a politician. And also, we have the limited budget devoted in campaigns. But even the law specifically regulate the limitation of campaign fund less than 2 million. That's for president. However, the reality is that every election is a wild competition. It's more than that. Okay. The other one to say, I just edit, so it's not in my PowerPoint, it's the absentee ballot. In Taiwan, because we have many businessmen in China, incorrect calculate maybe 2 or 3 million people in China. So if we have
What is that?
So
is it one of these fruits? So
that makes many people cannot vote.
English to Spanish to English is used, and then Bawla English to Spanish. Good.
Their hometown maybe in another city. Starting in the city, they have to pay the transportation fee back to their hometown. It costs time, it costs money, so that people can vote. We have a lot of discussions, but every time we discuss about this issue,
If there is something, then well, I cannot enter.
election in China. So this cannot talk about.
But maybe we don't need to lock it. Like, what if Abraham wants to come? Yesterday, people are coming here all the time, right? Yeah. Okay, and we were like, there is a big door. Alberto was like, I can hear door rings. Yeah. Okay. No, then I text you if something happens. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I think I need to have something. Take this. Take.
Yang dikunci ada kasih dia kali nggak ditaruh aja, soalnya kalau kunci biasanya kita nggak nyalakin ke orang sih, nanti tinggal bayar asli nanti kita yang kunci. So if you want to go out, okay, just let me know when you want to go out.
Okay. Okay.
You can find
Thank you.
her in that room.
Okay.
Di depan juga bisa kunci. Soalnya di belakang nggak selalu. Oh ya, oke. Just text me when you want to go out.
Okay. Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Oh, itu dikunci nanti. Oh, sekarang.
Your very cherished product. You will see the data of the manufacturer. You will see the ingredients and the price, of course. The more important things, you will collect more information. So by promoting this political consumerism, we also educate the people that elections are very important things. You have to know the legislator you vote or any politician you vote, what his record before, what his performance before. And we encourage voters to vote based on their previous performance, not how rich they are. And our goal is to help our voters to elect capable candidates, because so far we don't have any absentee vote, our election is seldom have any conflict. But we are educated people to select the capable candidates is much important, and we increase interaction between voters and politicians.
Mr. James, sorry, 2 more minutes.
Okay, this is the last one. Supervise the politicians through the power of civil society. And this is a slogan. What we say is democracy beginning after the election, because election is only for one day. Many conflicts happen that day, but the result of the investigation or how to oversee this politician, it's either 4 or 5 years by their terms. So our goal is educate the people. Democracy is not only for the election day, but beginning after the election. Okay, thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Mr. James, for sharing on Taiwan's experience. From your presentation, women account for high number in Taiwan's legislators. It is probably considered as one of the highest in the region, according to data from IPU. To get more lesson from Taiwan, please later on share us more about key of this success, not to mention that you stated earlier that money is still the biggest issues in candidacy. Is there any specific obstacle for women to run for parliament, and how the election authorities respond to it? But we will keep it for now. I would like to invite Honorable Mrs. Regina Walk to share her thoughts and experience for the next 10 minutes. Ms. Regina, please, time is yours.
Thank you so much, Ibu Eka, and thank you, James, for the excellent presentation. I'm so happy to see civil society represented here in this conversation, as civil society has been so essential to the gender equality movement, certainly. So thank you very much. I have a presentation as well, so if I can ask that to get loaded, I'll go ahead and get started. And as that's being pulled up, just thanks to the organizers and the Bawaslu leadership. I'm so glad to be here and to be able to spend some time talking about gender and electoral justice. So I'm happy to go ahead and just get started. Oh, there we go. So I'll move this. Let's see if I can successfully do this myself. There we go. So I'm going to give kind of a very quick overview of where the international community stands in terms of the commitment to gender equality in elections and in participation in public and political life. And I'll add, at least on paper, right? Because I think we've seen that the commitment has been restated over and over and over again by so many governments, and certainly enshrined in any number of international agreements and treaties, including, as I've noted here on the slide, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which the vast majority of countries in the world are states parties. And I realize this is a little bit small, but there are specific articles, Article 25, all about kind of the right and opportunity to take part in the conduct of public affairs and to have this equal access to public service in their country. And then the Convention, of course, on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, ratified by 189 UN member states, which is impressive. I sit here behind the American flag as an American, and one of the very small number of countries that has not ratified CEDAW. It has been signed but not ratified by our Senate. So just to say that perhaps James's commentary on the proportion of women represented in our national legislature is not a huge surprise. But here, CEDAW covers specifically under Article 7 that states shall take all appropriate measures. And I would note that in the commentary to that treaty, there is mention of also temporary special measures and affirmative actions to eliminate discrimination against women in the political and public life of the country, right? So ensuring that men and women have the equal right not just to vote in all elections and public referenda, but also to be eligible for election to all publicly held bodies. And then importantly for our conversation as well, to be able to perform all public functions at all levels of government. And then to be able to participate in civil society as well. So, there is this strong commitment. So many governments, in addition to signing on to these international instruments, have also enshrined gender equality and the equality of all citizens in their constitutions and national laws as well.
Recording in progress.
So let's talk a little bit about in practice how this is going. This is obviously going beyond just electoral justice and electoral dispute resolution mechanisms in the context of this conversation. But obviously, if we look at women as voters, if we look at women as candidates, and we look at women as election officials, I think we'll get a better picture of how women are participating in politics and public life and public service around the world. Move on. So I think my first point is just that we saw really excellent data from Adi in the first presentation, I think, about the democratic backsliding around the world. Lots and lots of information about where we are globally, where we are regionally. We just had a great presentation from James elucidating women's participation in Taiwan and any number of charts and graphs on various measures of political monitoring there, and there's these scorecards and all of these things. And there's okay national level data on a number of elements related to women's participation in public life, but gender disaggregated data is often unavailable at the global level. And there's, we have some of these good global stats on women's representation in national parliaments. The IPU does an excellent job on that. And I'll talk a little bit about in a minute how that kind of plays out in practice. But beyond that, the kind of comparative data on women's electoral participation is very limited. So we don't have great baseline data globally on women, the proportion of women who are serving as candidates, the proportion of women in local government, although there's some data there, just not great data on any sort of a global level. Women's participation in EMBs generally, although I am going to share with you some statistics about EMB leadership. Women in voter lists, right, and then women's voter turnout. We do have on the registration and the turnout side, there's a lot of self-report data. There is some national level data available. The surveys, the World Values Survey, for example, would indicate that globally men and women vote in about the same proportion. When you look down at self-report data at the national level, that there are gender gaps in both directions, depending on what country you're in, which kind of explains why they seem to manage to balance themselves out, and globally things look quite equal. And then, of course, that data is almost always self-report. There are a few countries that do have their EMBs collect, disaggregate, and release gender disaggregated data, but that is absolutely the exception and not the rule. So one area where we do have some excellent data, thanks very much to International IDEA, and this is very, very recent data. So this is of March of this year. So this is the kind of high level overview. So this is of 242 EMBs in 208 countries and territories. And globally, we are at 22% women are leading or chairing EMBs. Whereas that's 78% men. So, that's not great in terms of where we are on the leadership level there, especially given the role that EMBs have to play in ensuring that elections are conducted in an inclusive and fair way. And if we look at, there's a good bit of diversity across the regions. I tried to kind of lay that out here. The Americas is come closest to parity, I would say. I believe women account for about 36% of EMB chairs in the region. And then Asia on the other end of the spectrum has the lowest level of women chaired EMBs at 10%, followed very closely by Oceania. So that's not where we want to be, certainly. And, perhaps as a result, when we look at women's leadership in politics generally, and this is where we do have some better global statistics. You know, I think James mentioned, he gave the statistic, I think, about the U.S. Senate, but the women are only accounting for 26% of parliamentarians globally. So that's not a great place to be, considering that we are, 50% of the population, more than 50% of the population globally. We have a long way to go. 21% of government ministers are women. Only 26 women were serving as heads of state in 2021. And there's any number of countries, including my own, that have never had a woman head of state. So one thing I did want to flag, and flagging that this is data from the World Economic Forum's 2021 report, the report that came out last year in March, and any minute now I'm waiting for them to put up their new numbers. But the gender gap in political empowerment has been incredibly stubborn, and in fact has actually widened a little bit over the last couple of years. And right now, women are only at 22% parity with men. So we have a really long way to go. And if we continue to proceed at the current rate of progress, it's going to take more than 145 years for women to achieve gender parity in politics and in political leadership. And that's, I would argue, not time that we have as an international community. So how did we get
Ms.
here?
Regina, you have 2 more minutes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I will try it again a little bit faster. Sorry about that. So I just wanted to flag a couple of things that are specifically impactful from some of the other things that we've heard today, right? And yesterday as well. Democratic backsliding has had really significant impacts on women and on gender equality. In particular, we have kind of this rise of strongmen and authoritarian politics who are advocating for this return to traditional values and using that as an excuse to attack women who want to participate in public life. We see that perpetuated in social media and with disinformation campaigns that are specifically designed to go after women and to silence them and to encourage them to silence themselves. And then that is in itself a form of violence against women in politics, but it is one that is particularly detrimental. So what can we do? So getting into the gender and elections, IFES has this resource, the Elections Judgments Database. We launched it last year. It is a curated collection of cases from around the world that specifically deal with elections. I did a study at the end of last year about how gender shows up in some of those cases. And there's about 20 key cases that are included in the database on gender. So I thought I'd throw a couple of things out there for you. Most of them deal with quotas, right? Because that is a big part of the way that courts have been involved in seeing women take on a greater role in political and public life. I'm hoping that our colleague Justice Soto will talk about some of the cases from Mexico, as there's a number of really interesting cases coming out of the courts there. Indonesia has had some really interesting cases that the Bawaslu has provided judgments on about the opportunity to cure if a political party is putting forward a slate of candidates that does not meet that 30% threshold. In Kenya, there was a very famous case put forward by the High Court advising the president to dissolve the parliament in 2020 because for the 10th year in a row, the parliament had failed to meet the 2/3, failed to follow the 2/3 gender rule. And basically they do not have 1/3 women in their parliament. And per the Constitution, the High Court, a judge advised the president to dissolve the parliament because they had not been doing their job. And that judgment was ultimately ignored and brought back to the court for a more on-bank review, and the parliament, of course, stands. And then one other key case coming out of Samoa, which I think is quite interesting. In 2021, the country was kind of poised to elect its first woman prime minister. And Samoa also has a 10% gender quota. So when the parliamentary elections resulted in just a razor-thin defeat of the ruling party, the sitting prime minister basically sparked a coup by saying that the 5 women MPs that resulted from that election out of a total of 51 elected parliamentarians did not meet the 10% gender quota. And so the court had to basically intervene and talk about the quite formulaic and pedantic interpretation of whether 5 out of 51 was 10% or not, and ordered the election results to stand so that the new prime minister could be sworn in and Samoa could have its first female prime minister. So last slide, and then I will stop. I know I've abused everybody's time, but thinking about what we do about this and what are the roles that election management bodies and election dispute resolution mechanisms can play in this space. So in the kind of good practice space, enforcing gender quotas and making sure that the gender quotas as political parties are following them meet both the letter and the spirit of the law, including when EMBs and EDR mechanisms have the ability to enforce campaign finance penalties that come along with not meeting gender quotas, making sure that those are enforced as well. We want EMBs and election management bodies and election dispute resolution mechanisms to develop and implement a gender action plan for how they're going to have gender sensitive electoral justice processes. And then part of that is also being the example, right, as both institutions and individuals, making sure that our own bodies are gender balanced and that we are doing a good job to recruit women to serve in these positions and providing that information moving forward. And I'll stop here and maybe in the discussion share some interim findings that we have from some conversations around women's experiences with accessing electoral justice. There'll be much more to come on that moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Regina, for sharing the situation of gender parity issue in election and asserting on why gender equality is so key, particularly defining democracy as a threat. Maybe you can share more later on your thoughts on more practical strategy, in particular for election authorities to systematically respond in order to ensure a truly taking into account the right to candidacy that you mentioned. Gender gap still exists, in particular access of women to information on electoral disputes, and also gender-specific obstacles of women that may prohibit their effort to bringing the dispute. But before that, I will move to Justice Monica Arali Soto Fregoso. After this two speakers sharing a more general context of electoral justice, maybe Justice Monica, as you are a respected justice with years experience in an electoral tribunal in Mexico, and you're also a well-known gender champion in this area. So we certainly expect that you will share us a more practical experience, in particular in the judicial processes. What are obstacles and challenges that women may face, and how the Mexican electoral justice bodies handling the disputes, taking into account gender consideration. What are good practices, and how to manage its sustainability. So please, Justice Monica, time is yours.
Thank you very much. Muy buenas tardes a todas y a todos.
Good afternoon to everyone who is with us here today and online.
Los medios.
Thanks to new technologies. Truly, it's really nice for me and it's an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much for your kind invitation. And thanks to the organizers, Bawaslu, and everyone who's here today. Now I will speak about, in the first part of my speech, I will speak about the political participation of women in general and in the world, and then I will share with you some rulings that I consider are really good practices from the Electoral Tribunal of Mexico, not only to empower women, but to broaden their access to electoral justice. Afterwards, in a second part, I will speak about gender-based political violence. Obviously, we cannot consider a democracy being without women, so we should include them in every sense and way. How can we ensure their active participation as well in politics and institutions of the state in each of our countries? In the last decades, there have been many important progress on the topic, such as the declaration and platform of the Beijing Declaration and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The numbers speak for themselves. In January 2021, women held almost 6% of the heads of states positions worldwide, and 6.7% of the government heads were held by women. So this would take us 130 years to really reach gender equality. That is why we need these kind of opportunities to really take action, to take affirmative actions, and through the administration of justice, so that we can really advance, eradicate this inequality through different kinds of actions. Usually women they had rather topics on environmental issues, social issues, family issues, education issues. And it's not that these are not important topics for women, but rather, casually, they do not have the same access to the other kind of topics, such as financial issues or national economy issues, that might be considered more relevant or important to politics. Actually, only 20.9% of the presidencies of parliaments are held by women, and 28%. 25.5% in parliaments are held by women, which of course is very far away from truly gender equal conditions. So this low female participation in public official elected offices is a reality that is practically present in all countries. I'm very happy to be here with all of you, 30 participants, where only 9 of us are women. And it is very important to make sure that many women are part of these kind of forums. And ensure that there is a dialogue on these topics with all actors involved. To ensure further clarity to this presentation, I consider the next 2 elements very important. First, I would like to briefly comment that Mexico is a republic where there are 3 levels of government: federal, state, and municipal. The national territory is divided into 32 federative entities or states, where the head of these states is a governor. I comment this because part of the rulings that I will present later have to do with access of women to these elected offices in the maximum levels of the executive power in the different states. Another element that we should consider is that gender equality in Mexico is considered on a constitutional level. In 2014, this was transitioned into public policy. In 2014 was the first constitutional reform in this sense. And in 2019, This was a substantial progress constitutionally, where there should be gender equality in the three powers of state, so executive, legislative, and judicial, on the three levels, federal, local, and municipal. This is how the Electoral Tribunal, through its rulings, could advance women's access to these kinds of positions. So I will briefly comment on some rulings in this matter in terms of guaranteeing the exercise of political rights and electoral rights of women. In Mexico, we can today say that we have gender equality, and it might seem simple, but it is a tricky issue in all of our countries in the world. And of course, the road to get to gender equality can be very different in the countries. In 1963, women gained their right to vote. My mom was just born, and this was something new for her generation. So this is quite a recent thing. So this is when they gained the right to vote and to be voted for. And in the 90s, there was not a very important advance in this sense in women's rights. And it was in the 90s that this started to change in Mexico. And it was more systematized how they could and should exercise their rights. So another kind of affirmative action that we consider are the lists of candidates and women, men in the candidate lists of political parties. So in some cases, they need to be headed by women as an affirmative action. A part of the budget of political parties must be dedicated to these kind of issues so that women can gain further momentum within the political parties. We should determine if there is a gender-based political violence. We should consider what the conditions are of these women to exercise their rights as candidates. One of the cases that I would like to highlight in Mexico that is related to a ruling that we issued in the past electoral process has to do with the Congress on the national level that should be exactly 50-50% women and men. This was also achieved through the interpretation that the High Chamber of the Electoral Tribunal implemented. This is really a before and after in terms of the true participation of women in Mexico. We also determined through another ruling that of 15 provinces in Mexico, where there would be new elected officials, political parties should register at least 7 women of these 15. And this result was very good. So 6 of the 7 women were elected in the end. And citizens generally don't vote for women because they don't trust in women the same way. So that in Mexico, through the history, there have been many more men that held these offices. 300 men and 7 women in history. So this is where we can do a truly test the development in this area. We should really consider the context when we impart justice and when we administer justice so that we can maximize the rights of women, so that we can break the borders that are limiting many of our Women could not previously access to be governors, and now we managed to increase this representation on the municipal level. We also adopted a criteria that later was replicated on the municipal level, where the registration of candidates should be equal in a horizontal and vertical way and transsectorial. So this is an interesting road in Mexico where we have not reached this result in just one step. It has been complicated. Here it's very important to really highlight that we should recognize that there is a criteria for this in the highest authority of electoral justice in Mexico, so that we can really address this kind of case. The cases need to be appealed from the lower to the intermediate authorities and then finally to us. However, this is not an easy task. We're looking to progress and work more in terms of public communication, in terms of women's political rights. It costs a lot to defend women's rights. So we need to work more proactively with the political parties. And we have this important task ahead of us. On the municipal level, we have the biggest gender gap for women. We are barely reaching the 30% of women in these positions. And on the national level, we really do have a total gender equality in the parliament. To conclude this first part, I would like to conclude with that the majority of the rulings that are issued by the tribunal have applied an interpretation where there is not an explicit rule on this. We actually nullified an election when although there was not a law that gender political violence was a reason to nullify it, because we think that the interpretation of the judges is important to maximize the rights of women and how to progress in this sense. Many times the interpretation might not be so clear in the law, but we can make sure that we seek support in international standards and documents to strengthen arguments and ensure that we construct rulings that really favor women and ensure their access to their rights. These rulings that I have commented, and among many others, maybe I could share some more later, are rulings that are really transformatorial. They give us more momentum to change. It's concrete. And I think this is how the electoral justice can, with gender perspective, can truly ensure a more speedy progress through this kind of interpretation with a gender perspective. And that's how we can really maximize gender equality and women's exercise of their political electoral rights. These are rulings that really open the door to the next life of women, where they really can enjoy gender equality. This is where I will conclude for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justice Monica. Justice Monica for the excellent presentation. Before I open the floor for audience, I we'll give opportunity for the three speakers to give some comments on the presentation. Please start from who? Mr. James, Mrs. Regina, or
Okay, I'll go first.
oh, okay.
They're talking about
Please.
what's the obstacle for the woman to participate in the politics. You can see the rate. Most of the women in our parliaments that come from the party list. Also, they're from the regional, but the percentage only 35% right now. And most of the outstanding women, like they are the human rights lawyer, they are the professors, actually they're not rich enough to run election. So most of them, they're being nominated by the party. And you can see that a lot of the women in the district, why they can win the election, in the fact, because their husband, because their family. There are some local faction. They can help their wife, help their daughters to send them into the parliament. Yeah, when the election becomes the money games, it's not easy to women or easy to the young people to participate because you don't have any support from party, support from family. You cannot easy to win the election. So it's still an obstacle in Taiwan. I don't know if there are any experience in the country. Maybe we can talk about this, how send the woman into the parliament without supporting money, if that can happen. And the other thing is that I just said the money to run the election is another deposit. There's a example for there's an outstanding professor who teach the gender equality in our university. He wanted to elected to mayor, but he had a press conference that I don't have 2 million deposit. So please, if you support me, please donate me for the deposit. But she failed, so he didn't run the election. But the ruling party accept her opinion, and finally, the ruling party DPP sent her into the party list. So he become our legislator now. But there's still a big problem that if you don't have money, especially the women, especially the young people, you cannot run election in Taiwan. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is Ms. Regina or okay?
Either one. I'm happy to comment just a little bit on that last point. I do think that the financial resources and the financial gap between men and women, just generally and globally, is a huge barrier, not just for running for office, but also sometimes for seeking electoral justice. And this does kind of point back a bit to some of the work that we've been doing at IFAS over the last few months. To gather some data around the world, and by which I mean doing kind of qualitative interviews about ways that we can make the electoral justice more gender sensitive. And I think so part of this is the support that women candidates tend to not have from their political parties, and of course in places where, in order to get on a ballot and to really have a chance of being elected, you do need that support. One of the things that I've heard in a number of countries now is that women may run for office very often. Women are much more likely than men, right? Because there are so few women in office now to be first-time candidates. And as a result, they will, come with less established networks. Many of them do not have, necessarily deep pockets in terms of past financial resources. They're not necessarily going to get political party support in terms of funding. And then very often too, they don't always they're not always provided with kind of the rules of the road for campaigning, by which I mean the actual regulations, and then find themselves running afoul of those rules and end up being accidentally perhaps violating campaign regulations and finding themselves actually being the target of electoral dispute resolution bodies as having violated those rules. And then when they do, they're less likely to be supported by their political parties and also less likely to have the financial resources to bring in outside representation. And similarly, for those women candidates who would like to bring forward a case related to a potential violation, because depending on where you are in the world, if the only hope you have of being successful in bringing forward your case is to have a lawyer, because everybody has a lawyer and you can't afford a lawyer, you are going to face challenges there. Also, oftentimes just the court filing fees can be prohibitive for women. The distance that some women have to travel to register their cases, to appear in court, is, some of that has moved digitally with COVID, but a lot of it has not. And even when it has, depending on who you are, you may be less likely to have access to those types to the internet. The digital divide really also hurts women candidates there. And the last thing I'll say about kind of the money in politics and the cost of running a campaign is that in a lot of ways, women candidates, young candidates, first-time candidates are even more dependent on social media and using online mechanisms to get their messages out, to fundraise, to do all of these things. And so in a lot of ways, social media and having that open space has been a tremendously powerful tool for women candidates. But as they also, because they face so much gender disinformation online, hate speech online that is specifically targeting them because they are women, with the design of getting them to not speak up and to not run for office, it's very much a double-edged sword. They're absolutely reliant on social media and on the internet as a way to campaign, and at the same time, they're putting themselves at a great deal more risk for just all kinds of abuse and harassment. And, that is, depending on where you are in the world, that may or may not be considered an act of political violence or a violation in the election space. And that's something that perhaps Justice Soto can talk a little bit more, because I think Mexico has been particularly successful in addressing those types of harms against women. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Alberto, okay.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
De alguna manera también hacer una pregunta y tratar
to kind of answer this question, but also try to combine the three speeches that we had in this panel. I'd like to suggest something. I think the first speech, if I understood correctly, is there is a hindrance in terms of the political participation of women, in terms of the financial capabilities of women to be candidates. There's a clear obstacle in the legal term, whose solution might be to, through an electoral reform, to really open the space, and that way eliminating the financial barrier. Also, we heard other comments in terms of access, maybe to social media, that we can see is an issue for women. And the last comment that Regina shared in terms of gender political violence, what can be the role of electoral justice to truly attack this kind of gender-based political violence, and with implementable actions to send clear messages into the political classes and political parties, and of course the voters, about the importance to have women participating in public life free from violence. The Mexican case could probably contribute with many concrete examples on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Alberto. Justice Maria, Do you want to give comment maybe for two or 3 minutes before I open the floor for the audience?
Gracias. Sí, bueno, quisiera también compartirles un poco lo que desde esta visión de obstáculos que se han evidenciado ahorita o comentado en esta mesa, que tiene que ver con el dinero, que tiene que ver con la violencia política hacia las mujeres, son obstáculos que también se viven en nuestro país, pero que hemos tratado a través de el juzgamiento.
We have addressed through the administration of electoral justice with a gender perspective. I will refer to a case that for us is really key case for us in Mexico in terms of the nullification of election, if there is a female candidate that experienced violence during the campaign period. In a region that is very mountainous, called the Guerrero, there is a majority of population where people participate that are part of indigenous peoples. There are some of these people that have many challenges to access justice from a gender perspective. This was about a location that is very hard to reach in the mountains, where you have indigenous peoples, where women don't have the same space in the public life, but rather more in the private life. However, there was a female candidate in this region, and what happened? Before the election day, there were some banners and graffiti that were violent towards the female candidate with hate speech messages. For example, and I'm sorry for these examples, no more old lady in the power, no more women, women cannot govern, this is the time of men, and some that are not accurate to or appropriate to mention here. So what did we see? This slander campaign before election day had a substantial effect and negative effect on the electoral results and the final voting of the people. And these banners and graffiti was on the way to the polling stations. So when you arrived to the polling stations, it was obvious that there was an impact. So this female candidate asked to appeal the result. So we were able to identify these elements that allowed us to contrast the different conditions for competition. And we saw that there was political violence towards this female candidate because she is a woman. There is general violence. There is general violence, and there's also political violence in general for both men and women. But when it comes to women in politics, there is a very particular violence because they are women. And here there is really clear evidence that these messages fortify the patriarchy and favored men in the election. Our law establishes that we can nullify elections, which of course is the last recourse for these kind of cases. But as such, it does not establish that gender political violence can be a reason to nullify elections. But we did see the machismo, the misogyny, and how this affected the politics. So we chose to interpret from a constitutional perspective that allowed us to conclude that we should nullify the election for this reason.
no solo neutralizar, sino eliminar.
This is not only about neutralizing, but also eliminating the violence.
We're running out of time, sorry. We still have
Oh, I will conclude. Yes, thank you.
discussion, so maybe we can go deeper later in the into your thoughts on this matter. Oh, sorry.
Okay, no, so yeah, thank you.
So I will move to discussion to open discussion to audience, but since we have a very limited time, so I will limit the question maybe for three questions from the audience, whether in this room or those who also following the discussion through Zoom. So maybe we can start from this room first. We have Mas Aditya Perdana, and who else? The committee, do we have questions from the online audience? No? Oh, Mr. John Philip, okay. The second, and the third one, maybe? The last question? Mbak Titi, okay. Okay, please, Mas Aditya.
Oke, terima kasih. Ini mungkin berdasarkan pengalaman saya juga, mengawal isu keterwakilan perempuan di Indonesia sejak hampir lebih dari 15 tahun. Jadi mungkin saya akan memulai untuk mengatakan bahwa ada kebutuhan komitmen politik yang kuat gitu ya di antara partai politik, masyarakat sipil, dan juga penguatan kelembagaan politik seperti regulasi, aturan yang ada gitu ya, dan kemudian yang mendorong terciptanya keterwakilan perempuan itu bisa lebih baik di masa yang akan datang. Jadi saya menduga bahwa apa yang pengalaman Indonesia dapatkan dan juga tadi disampaikan dari Taiwan, dari Meksiko, mungkin kita bisa belajar juga untuk mengatakan bahwa perlu ada komitmen politik yang tetap dan harus dijaga, ditambah dengan enabling environment, ruang politik yang juga memudahkan bagi semua aktor politik dan juga masyarakat sipil untuk bisa mendorong gender quota dan gender equality itu bisa bekerja dengan baik dan lebih baik tentunya saja, bukan hanya bekerja dengan baik tapi lebih baik hasilnya gitu. Itu satu hal yang saya pikir pembelajaran yang kami dapatkan selama kurang lebih dari 15 tahun mengamati gender equality dan gender quota di Indonesia. Dan setelah saya mendengar dari presentasi Meksiko terus kemudian Taiwan, saya pikir ini juga menjadi sesuatu yang menarik untuk kita pelajari juga. Nah, yang kedua mungkin saya ingin bertanya ke James ya. Tadi disampaikan ada positif trending ya, peningkatan keterwakilan perempuan, ada sesuatu yang meningkat hasilnya. Nah, yang ingin saya tahu dalam momen atau event seperti apa di dalam peningkatan keterwakilan perempuan di Taiwan itu bisa berhasil. Jadi
regarding women's representation in Taiwan, which works.
Itu bisa terjadi peningkatan itu dan terus kemudian terus menaik, itu disebabkan oleh apa?
So what is the cause of the improvement of women participation in Taiwan? So that's what I want to know from Taiwan.
Just want to clarify because in the beginning there is no translations. So Mr. Aditya would like to ask to all of you, to the Justice Soto and also to Regina and also to the James, what the level of the political commitment with regards to support the gender equality? Because after 15 years working as the civil society and observe how Indonesia political parties, political commitments, and Mr. Adit is want to asking about your country experience with level of that commitment and how to maintain the political commitment with regard to gender equality. There's also a special question to Mr. James, why the number is getting higher. Thank you.
Thank you for Mr. Fritz. So sorry, I don't know the internet process.
Let's continue, Mr. John Philip, with your questions.
Yes, thank you. Just like to not to have a question, but to share the experience in France and perhaps to answer one of your questions. In France, we have had a constitutional amendment in 1999 to introduce the gender equality in the constitution as an objective, of course, not as an obligation to do so, as an objective which turned to mandatory for all proportional elections. But our parliament is not proportionally elected. The first chamber, the National Assembly, it's elected by a majoritarian vote. To force the political parties to encourage the gender equality, and not only to encourage, to respect the gender equality, there is a kind of financial fine for those who are not respecting the obligations to present as most candidates from both genders. So if you have 100 candidates, you have to present 50 women, 50 men, and you have a margin of appreciation of 2%. That means that you can go up to 49, 51 of different gender, but not more. If you get over this, for example, if you present 48 women and 52 men, then you have a penalty on your public funding of 150% of the difference. Here, in my example, the difference is 4. Then you have 6% less of the public funding. If you get by public funding 1 million, you get 6% less than 1 million as financial fine. This leads to quite respectful of the gender equality at the first chamber. We have now 39.5% of women and so almost 60% of men. It's not perfect equality, but France is one of the best countries of the European Union at the first chamber. At the second chamber, the upper chamber, it's 32% of women. And almost all parties are respecting now this obligation. There is only, let's say, 2 big parties, political parties, that are not respecting it. One is the Conservatives, and the other one is the extreme left. Those are the 2 main parties that are not respecting this obligation for the legislative elections. For the other elections, the gender equality is quite respected because of the proportional. And the only other election where we don't have proportional is the election for the provinces, but the vote is binominal. So you have to present 2 candidates, and there are 2 elected, and necessarily 1 man, 1 woman. So it's almost respected. There is one last exception, is for the presidency, President of the Republic, and until now we haven't
president of the French Republic, who is a woman. We had only one woman as prime minister, but it was the shorter mandate as prime minister we ever had, less than 9 months. And for this election on next April, in a couple of weeks, we have 12 candidates, 4 women, 8 men, so it's not very equal. We will probably have at the second ballot 1 man, 1 woman, as the situation is now, and probably the man will win. So we won't probably have a woman as president, not even in 2022. I hope so, because if it's the woman who may win, she's from the right extremist, and I really deeply hope that she won't win this election. Sorry for this political-oriented speech.
Please continue with Ms. Titi.
Thank you, Mbak Eka. I have 2 questions. Before I raise my question, I would like to illustrate my question first. We know that recently there was a development in South Korea's presidential election where the president-elect was a candidate whose one of his campaign promises was to dissolve the Ministry of Gender Equality. Quota or affirmative action are considered counterproductive and discriminate against men. Maybe Mas Ical, you can add more information on this. In addition, in Indonesia, there is a view that unlike women's representation in parliament, electoral justice is gender neutral, so quota and affirmative action are irrelevant. In Indonesian paradigm, some of the politicians think that electoral justice is gender neutral. What matters is the professionalism and integrity of the people in the electoral justice bodies. With that in mind, I'd like to hear from Ms. Regina and Judge Monica's comments regarding these 2 issues. Especially for Judge Monica, I have a special question. Are there any special procedures within the electoral justice body that need to be adopted so that women are more courageous and feel protected to be part of the electoral justice process, whether as applicant or as witness? Thank you, Mbak Eka.
Thank you. Before the panelists will give a response, I would kindly remind you that we are go beyond the time, so please respond in very short comments. Maybe in maximum 3 minutes per panelist. Yeah, so sorry for the inconvenience. So, please respond. Who come first? Oh, Miss.
Ladies first.
I'll take the privilege then. So on the first question about South Korea and the concern about the promise to eliminate the gender ministry. I mean, I think, there's not having a quota or having a dedicated body to address women's issues is presumably will only be unnecessary when we have kind of parity in our system, and we don't. And I think I would actually apply that to my comment on the second as well, which is that, oftentimes electoral justice bodies will maintain that they're gender neutral, but if you have a law on the books that maintains that you have to have a certain proportion of, a political party slate that has, 30% women, and that political party is not there, it is the job of the body to enforce that. So I think, being gender neutral is kind of what has gotten us to where we are at this particular moment. And in fact, there is plenty of justification in the international agreements that most of these governments have signed and ratified that that allow for specifically affirmative actions and temporary special measures to be put into place. And I think we've seen for too long what happens when those are not upheld by the courts. And in fact, when there has to be kind of the political will on the part of the parties to do that as well, which is why I think the example about the campaign finance, public financing fines can be very helpful. It depends on your system and how much those political parties are relying on public funding to, be viable. In the United States, that's not something that the public funding is so small that's not something that would be determinative, right? So I think that at a minimum, electoral justice bodies have a responsibility to enforce the letter of the law, certainly. And I think one of the things that we've seen in a number of places where things have been more successful is also understanding what the intent and the spirit of the law was as well. So if you have political parties that are only putting women on their slates and doing so in a way that disadvantages them intentionally, but they do it because they have to have that or their list is going to be thrown out. We need to be able to hold people to the intention of that quota as well, which is to get more women into elected office. I'll stop there.
Okay. The question about why the proportion of the Taiwan's genders is become better. I don't have the exactly answer, but in my experience, the environment in Taiwan, because the vibrant of the NGO, so it make a lot of efforts. The most biggest NGO in Taiwan about gender, it's called the Garden of Hope Foundation. His budget a year is about maybe 100 million from government, from public. So it can do many things helping the gender improvement. And the other thing is that when you say something, discriminations, like discrimination language to the female in this times in Taiwan's environment, you will be criticized by everyone. So it's an environment, not just only for the politics. When this happened, because of the NGOs, because the civil society push this kind of this phenomenon, this kind of environment that caused the women participate politics more easily. And the other is that when you have the woman in the Congress, that can be a good experience because they help more women in different area. So it's a good recycle. More women in the parliament, more effort in this area of things. So I think why this become more happens easily for women to get into the parliament in Taiwan. And also about the obstacle of the money's politics. I think the deposits is some reason to set there, but it must be lowered down, not so unreasonable high. It's not easy for everyone, like women or young people, to participate the politics. So I think this can be discussion in Taiwan, but it's not very easily because I don't know why. Maybe I can discussion maybe later, and I will bring back this kind of issue and have collaborate with other NGO in Taiwan about genders. Thank you for your advice. Thank you.
Thank you. And last comment from Justice Maria.
Mónica.
So sorry, Justice Mónica. Oh, yeah.
Gracias.
Sorry.
Bueno, de manera muy breve.
Thank you. Yeah, so just briefly, I would like to respond to these questions that Titi conveyed to us. I think it is very important to tell that there is a neutral application of the normative. And unfortunately, still, the result is very different for women and men. So we also need to work on how to assume this methodology with gender perspective and put into perspective the application, the neutral application of the rules and laws. But of course, in light of the differences between the genders and equality conditions, when we construct this vision of administering justice with gender perspective, we need to understand what are these extra conditions in terms of discrimination, historical background that women are facing in order to exercise their rights. So for this, we need to interpret that considers all these conditions and differences between women and men. And in terms of whether the tribunal has some kind of policy or action specifically for women so that they're not afraid of maybe presenting their cases, we have an array of case laws very much backed up, as well as protection measures that are guaranteed to women when they present their cases or complaints in terms of security, in terms of the time that it takes them to present this, and not only when they go physically to the trial, but also throughout the whole period where they, and also if they are elected during the whole time, they can receive this protection. Sorry, there's a technology issue. The internet is breaking up. I'm so sorry. These are examples of the measures that we have adopted within the tribunal.
Sorry, Mr. Albert, are you going to add some more comment or?
Yeah, the translation broke in the last part, so I just want to jump in.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Well, Justice Soto was speaking about these specific protection measures for the plaintiffs. And then the second part was about hiding the name of the person who files the complaint so that she wouldn't be re-victimized on the media outlets by, presenting her name in repeatedly and making her a victim of political violence again over and over again. That was the last part.
Thank you, Mr. Alberto. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, let us give applause to all the panelists. I'm sure that we still want to continue this warm discussion, but due to limited times, sorry that I will take the answer from all panelists as a closing statement as well. So sorry for the inconvenience caused. And I thank you all, and I hope that this lively and fruitful discussion will provide us some insight. And also, we know that there are some homeworks as well that we have to continue to. We will bring up again these issues and discuss more deeply on that. Thank you, everyone. I'm Eka. I'm standing out. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you to Mrs. Eka Rahmawati. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to inform you that you can download all of the presentation of this event by scan your barcode in front of your laptop on your name tag. Ladies and gentlemen, we just finished our morning session and we will break for lunch until 2 p.m. Lunch will be held on Pandawa Room on the left side of this room. Thank you. Give applause to these discussions. 2. The lunch will be held until 2 p.m. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I collapsed. Okay.